It is the Banner Ravens podcast. Paul Mancano and Jonas Shaffer. We got a lot to talk about here on this episode. Ravens bringing back a familiar face from the 2023 season, getting him under contract. And should the Ravens franchise tag Justin Madubuike, their defensive tackle, as we get deeper into this offseason? The Ravens' plans all coming together. All that and much, much more. But first, a quick word from our sponsors.
If you have an appetite for saving money, then you should get the Rofo Rewards app from Royal Farms. Use the Rofo Rewards app to place mobile orders for pickup or delivery and earn royalty points to redeem for free stuff. And right now, new Rofo Rewards members will get a free any-size coffee for signing up. You can download the Rofo Rewards app at the Apple App Store or Google Play today. You'll find it's a very appealing app to have. Real fresh, real fast. Royal Farms.
The CIAA Men's and Women's Basketball Tournament is February 26th through March 3rd at CFG Bank Arena. Baltimore is bringing the hoops, the culture, and the energy. So grab your tickets now and book your hotel at baltimore.org/CIAA.
All right, Jonas, you are back up in freezing cold Maryland. I'm down here in sunny Florida for Orioles spring training. How jealous are you?
I don't do well in the heat.
That's fair. I mean, the sun, the heat just can't be good for somebody with as much red hair as you. I just can't imagine it would go over well.
Nope. I'm comfortable lurking in the shadows, lurking in the shade with refrigeration. I do like the sun, but unlike Gianna Honor, dear and devoted colleague, I'm not the type of person to spend a couple days in Puerto Rico. Send me to where my people come from. Send me to a place where the clouds are closer to the ground.
Yeah, and every day is just overcast and bleary. And all right, well, we won't send you down to spring training anytime soon. All right, Jonas, let's talk about the biggest Ravens news of the week so far, and that would be them bringing back wide receiver Nelson Agholor and a 1-year contract extension. This was not an all too surprising move, only because of the financial implications. Had the Ravens not made this offer to Nelson Agholor, and had they decided to let him hit free agency as they have with a few other guys who all carry dead money into the 2024 season?
It's not a surprise because of those financial implications, but it's also a bit of an aberration because, just looking after the deadline passed to see how many of these guys whose contracts voided on Monday also sign extensions. Agholor, according to CBS Sports, half an hour when I checked it, was the only guy of like 3 or 4 dozen players to sign an extension. I think that's a testament to the relationship the Ravens had developed with Agholor, but also kind of a acknowledgement of like how many teams are in bad shape salary cap wise, that like they are just looking to bite the bullet this year as opposed to pushing stuff down the road, because it's not like the $1+ million that the Ravens had set aside in void years for this year goes away with this new contract, the terms of which, by the way, we still don't know, but it does allow them to push it down the road a little bit. You're going to have to pay the piper eventually. So good on the Ravens for getting a deal done with Nelly. I'm sure they would have liked to get a deal done with Kevin Zeitler, as we'll talk about in just a sec. But just to help, shore up that wide receiver room, considering all the uncertainty there, considering just the veteran influence, the veteran presence he lends that group. I think, depending on how big or small that deal is, it seems like a good bit of business just from the 30,000 foot view that we're taking.
Yeah, you mentioned the deadline on Monday for the contract that was set to void, and essentially that would have accelerated $1.7 million onto the Ravens 2024 salary cap. So essentially, the deal that he signed last year allowed the Ravens to push money into the future. So had he been allowed to hit that deadline and go through that deadline without the Ravens extending him, that would have been just dead money sitting on their salary cap. And of course, then they would have had to make another offer to him in free agency and compete with other teams in order to retain his services. And you mentioned what he brought to the Ravens last year. it's not just a good bit of business, it's also a good bit of roster construction as well, because they needed some stability in that wide receivers room. You know, he was a good, solid number 4 wide receiver for them in 2023, had 35 catches, 381 yards, 4 touchdowns, played all 17 games, including that meaningless week 18 game. Uh, and you look at this wide receiver room that we don't know the status of Zay Flowers for next season at this point in the offseason. Still much to be determined there. Rashad Bateman, former first round pick, coming off a very down season, did not give you many encouraging signs that he's going to be able to get back to where he was with Lamar Jackson, get on the same page. Could happen, but certainly you want some kind of insurance policy. Then you've got OBJ, who is set to hit free agency as well. So you're talking about replacing a lot of production there. So to bring back Nelson Agholor on just the 1 year, again, we don't know the terms, but they needed another guy and another veteran in this room for next year before they even get to free agency in the draft.
Yeah, not huge production last year, but he stepped up in big games. 35 catches overall, 381 yards, 4 touchdowns, but a couple of those touchdowns were in the games where the Ravens really shined the brightest. He had the touchdown on the slot fade against Cincinnati late in that fourth quarter to win that week 2 game. He had the incredible tip drill catch touchdown again against the Bengals on that Thursday night game, I believe it was. He had a touchdown in the blowout win over the Lions. He had a touchdown in that upset win over the 49ers. Obviously, him being on the wrong side of 30, you wonder, you know, how much further his best years are removed from him in his career. But I think the Ravens, you saw bursts of that speed. You saw him be able to separate from pretty good cornerbacks at times last year. And, he's a guy who has never really been a super dynamic athlete, relative to the other kind of first round picks that he found himself in company with and found himself compared to. So if he can be a guy who can give you 300, 400 yards next season, assuming he stays healthy, be a good locker room guy, be a good blocker there in the slot. Um, you don't need him to be more than like, I don't want to see, I don't want to even say wide receiver 3 or wide receiver 4. I think it's more like receiver 5 or, receiver 6, because it's not just, the wide receivers who are going to be the focuses of this passing game next year. It's Mark Andrews, it's Isaiah
Yeah.
Lake. That's why when you see people talk about, oh, the Ravens receiver room is this, the Ravens receiver room is that, it's like, uh, I guess I can kind of get on board with you saying that it's only, mediocre or average. Although I would say that I think a lot of people are being swayed by just what the Chiefs did against the Ravens, and we saw what the Chiefs do to the 49ers, who have an incredible duo there with Ayuk and Samuel and Juwan Jennings. So I would urge people to take it back a little bit, a couple steps back, have perspective that I think was a better than average group this past year, and I think it could be a better than average group next year. But considering the totality of who the Ravens have coming back, how much better some of those guys should be, assuming they are coming back, I think the Ravens are in better shape than maybe some people are kind of catastrophizing this room.
Yeah. Other than Nelson Agholor, the Ravens did have several players who had void years that were set to expire on Monday that they could have tried to extend in order to get rid of that dead money, essentially. And Kevin Zeitler is one of them. Gus Edwards, Rocky Sean, Geno Stone, all together. They could not extend any of them. We don't know exactly how hard they tried, but I would think Kevin Zeitler would be at the top of the list, which with each of the following guys below him. They will count as 8.3 million in dead money in 2024. So they are paying the piper in terms of the contracts that they had on the books and that they pushed off into the future because they were trying to get production now.
Yeah, and now the challenge becomes, how badly do you want them, and how urgently do you move to try to get them? Because you can still sign Kevin Zeitler. He doesn't become a free agent technically until I think March 11th. But if they couldn't get a deal done by now, then it's really tough for me to see Kevin Zeitler's representation saying, take this money from the Ravens, as opposed to waiting out the development of this open market. Because, yes, he is older for a offensive lineman. Yes, he's been in the league for, I think, over 10 years now at this point. but he is a Pro Bowl right guard who rarely got beaten in pass protection, and there is going to be a market for that. And there are a lot of teams with a lot of young quarterbacks who need that kind of protection up the middle, who need that kind of run blocking. And I don't think the Ravens are in any position right now to win any kind of bidding war for a guy who might fetch, $8-10 million, whatever it's going to be a year. I think PFF had him being like a $7 million a year guy. And if he gets into a market that is, low on premium interior pass blockers, then that number might go up. So it's a tough spot for the Ravens, but obviously they are now staring down the barrel of the possibility of losing their two starting guards and perhaps more, because we don't know exactly what their plans are for Ronnie Stanley on the left side or Morgan Moses on the right side.
Yeah, difficult, uncertain times for that offensive line at a time when, Lamar Jackson coming off his healthiest season in years, and he stayed upright. He stayed
Yeah.
healthy for the entire season. You want to try to bring that back. You want to try to keep as many pieces as you want, especially in the interior line. And with as many question marks as you have right now on the rest of the roster, certainly not an ideal update that Kevin Zeitler appears headed towards free agency. One guy who might be headed toward free agency, who the Ravens certainly would like to keep in-house, that would be Justin Madubuike. Should the Ravens try to place the franchise tag on Justin Madubuike? We'll explain exactly what that could mean for the Ravens. Now, Madubuike turned 26 in November. He's a former third-round pick, had 13 sacks in 2023, a breakout season after having just 8.5 sacks combined in the previous 3 seasons. Jonas, you had talked about throughout the season how his sack numbers probably inflated, were a bit inflated, even though he wasn't winning as many, as many reps as some other defensive tackles. But 13 sacks is 13 sacks. And guys who have 13 sacks, who are this young, who were this healthy throughout his career, especially as of late, played 10 games his rookie year, then 15 his sophomore year, and then 17 each of his past 2 seasons. They don't hit free agency very often. And when they do hit free agency, they get bags from teams. They get suitors lining up for their services. And teams like the Ravens that have to pay franchise quarterback money to their franchise quarterback are stuck in a difficult position if they want to try to retain a guy like this. And that's why we're having this discussion about the franchise tag, because it seems like one of the better options if the Ravens want to try to keep Justin Madubuike from approaching free agency.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's much of a discussion at this point. I know the Ravens are hard up for cap space right now, but they have mechanisms and levers to pull to get them space. And whether it's 20 million or 21 million or whatever that franchise tag dollar amount ends up being, I think Madubuike has played himself into a spot where you can't let him go this year. As I wrote about in the story, just kind of breaking down the situation, the Ravens are in a window to win right now, and there's no guarantee that you can find a Justin Madubuike replacement, nor are there any obvious replacements for him either in-house or out-of-house. There's a lot of good pass rushers who could hit the free agency market, but considering just where Madubuike is athletically, just like you, Paul, he's probably entering his athletic prime. I don't know.
If this is the prime, I'm really concerned.
I saw you run routes outside of M&T Bank Stadium. I know you could stem that route like Randy Moss. I just think that even if it's only for 1 year, because maybe his agent is playing hardball and insisting that he be a top of the market paid interior rusher as opposed to like only top 5, then that is worth it, because the goal in Baltimore is to win a Super Bowl. And I think that gets a lot tougher if Justin Madubuike is not on your team.
Yeah, so in terms of his production in 2023, only 11 defensive tackles have racked up 20-plus sacks over their first 4 seasons since 2000, a list that includes Aaron Donald, Geno Atkins, Geno Stone, too many Genos in this league, Ndamukong Suh, Chris Jones, a lot of great players on that list. Jeffrey Simmons, of course, on the Tennessee Titans. However, I will say, Pro Football Focus, and you mentioned this about how many reps he's winning on a game in and game out basis. Pro Football Focus has had him in 2023 as just the 17th ranked interior defensive lineman, 3 spots below Michael Pierce, who the Ravens were able to extend right before the end of the season. We appreciated at the time, and we recognized at the time, that the extension for Michael Pierce was at the very least insurance in case the Ravens were to miss out on Justin Madubuike. Would be great if they could bring both of those guys back. But if you're talking about a defensive line that has starters of Michael Pierce and Travis Jones, that's just a much, much worse, much thinner defensive line, even if you try to replace Justin Madubuike in the draft. And for a team that is set to lose potentially Jadeveon Clowney in free agency, who just had a bounce back year, that, is set to lose Kyle Van Noy, who came close to 10 sacks this past year, who still doesn't know exactly what they have in David Ojabo. That would be a major concern and just a major blow to their pass rush.
I think that the interesting hypothetical to consider is like how good could the Ravens defensive line be next year if Madubuike comes back? Because I think we all saw how good Michael Pierce was this year when he's fully healthy, when he was, fully engaged and in shape with this defensive line and this defense. I think the expectation of Baltimore is that Travis Jones is going to make that year 3 leap. He has, just freakish potential with that raw strength he has. We saw Broderick Washington come on strong finally toward the end of last year after a kind of disappointing first 3 months. So that's a really nice foursome. Maybe you can get Brent Urban back on a sweetheart deal. He's always been extremely productive rotational player. And if Madubuike comes back, I think you're relying on the interior pass rush to be the thing that floats your ships next year, because they're probably losing Clowney. They're probably losing Van Noy. Oweh, I think, took a nice leap this year, but who else is going to really help lift that group? Ojabo, we don't know. Tavius Robinson might only be a solid run stopper next year. We don't know, how close he is to being a 5-6 sack a year type guy. But Madubuike has gotten better every single year, and there's nothing in his trajectory that suggests that this is definitely the high water mark for his career. You look at his QB pressure rate according to Next Gen Stats as a rookie, 7% with not a whole lot of action. 2021, a little bit more action, 5.1%. And then the next 2 years, it's like an exponential growth. 2022, 6.5%. 2023, 13.1%. That is elite. And the Ravens pass rush, when it wasn't relying on deception and creativity or just sheer numbers to get to the quarterback, was so much better with him on the field than with him off the field. And I think that's something that the Ravens have to recognize as they decide, whether to offer him a contract or whether to offer him a franchise tag, and then how much to offer him a contract when they actually do kind of get back down to brass tacks and hopefully try to negotiate a deal that keeps him in Baltimore for the long term.
Yeah, I mean, he just had so many important snaps for this team. Played 65% of the snaps in 2023. Michael Pierce, very solid in his 55%. And Travis Jones, like he said, could be getting more snaps next year anyway. He had 38% of the snaps, but you just would be losing so much production and so much down in and down out important, pass rushing snaps. All right, so
As
let's
a
talk
run
about.
defender too.
Yeah, no, absolutely. All right, let's talk about the franchise tag and what the Ravens could do there in order to try to keep him from hitting free agency. And, Ravens fans are probably a little too familiar with this conversation about the franchise tag, considering what happened with Lamar Jackson last year. But today begins the window opening for the franchise tag, and it closes on March 5th at 4:00. So the Ravens have until then to try to place the franchise tag on Justin Madubuike. Teams can only use one per year. Over the Cap projects the defensive tackle franchise tag to be $19.7 million. CBS Sports projects the franchise tag to be $20.98 million. So that is quite a lot of money. And essentially, there are 3 different kinds of tags here. There's the exclusive tag, there's the non-exclusive tag, and there's the transition tag. The exclusive tag prohibits players from negotiating with any other team, and this is a higher bar to clear. This is a more expensive tag. It is calculated by the top 5 salaries at the position for the current year. Now, only 4 players since 2012 have gotten the exclusive franchise tag. It's Kirk Cousins, Von Miller, Drew Brees, and Le'Veon Bell. It is a very exclusive category here because it is such a high price tag. Next is the non-exclusive franchise tag, which allows a player to negotiate with other teams. But if that player is signed by another team to an offer sheet, the team that places the tag on him has the right to match the offer or receive 2 first-round picks in exchange for letting him sign with the other team. This is the Lamar Jackson franchise tag that they signed him to last year. So essentially, the Ravens were allowing him to negotiate with other teams. No teams ended up offering Lamar Jackson handing him an offer sheet, even though they probably would have, they probably should have, but they were calculating the 2 first-round picks, and they were also calculating the very high price tag that they would have had to pay for Lamar Jackson, in addition to the fact that they could have had to wait up to 5 days to see if the Ravens were going to match that offer. Now, this is calculated by the average of the 5 largest salaries at the position in the previous year. So that's the non-exclusive tag. And then finally, the transition tag allows players to negotiate with other teams. And if the player signs the offer sheet and it isn't matched, then he walks away for no compensation. So no first round picks involved in the franchise tag. So the benefit for the player in terms of the franchise tag is the very high salary. The benefit for the team is that he doesn't hit free agency and you're not committing long-term years. But typically players don't like the franchise tag because they wait the 4 or 5 years to hit free agency. They want to try to cash in with some kind of long-term stability. Plus they want the ability to choose where they can sign. So team players tend to not like it. And that's why teams have to pay such a hefty price to franchise tag their guys. And if they want to franchise tag him twice, the price tag gets absolutely astronomical. It goes up 20% on the second tag, 44% on the third tag, 44% on the already bumped up 20% tag. So it just becomes totally unreasonable. But in terms of the first tag that the Ravens could do here with Justin Madubuike, they've used the franchise tag 8 times in their history. We mentioned Lamar Jackson. Matthew Judon, similar situation. That was the non-exclusive franchise tag, similar situation to the one that Justin Madubuike is entering right now. Justin Madubuike, or Matthew Judon, I should say, played on the franchise tag, then walked in free agency after playing the year. They also used it on Terrell Suggs. That was less to keep Terrell Suggs in-house in 2008 for just a year and let him hit free agency. It was more to give themselves more time to work out a long-term deal, similar to the Lamar Jackson deal where he can't go negotiating with other teams and they will always have the chance to match in free agency or match an offer sheet. And they're just giving themselves more time to work out a long-term deal. So there's a lot to be discussed here, Jonas. Of those 3 tags, which one do you think makes the most sense for Justin Madubuike?
It's the most common one. It's the non-exclusive tag, just because of how prohibitive the cost would be for another team to say, "I want that, give me that." And you know, I don't think a team that has the money to pay Justin Madubuike $20-25 million a year is a team that is going to be very good over the next 2 years, unless they're like a Texans team that has really struck gold with their young rookie contract quarterback. Because if you are willing to give up a first round pick over the next 2 years, that is a heavy price to pay for a guy who we think is a pretty good defensive lineman, but you better be damn sure that he's like one of the 2 or 3 best at his position if you're giving up draft capital as rich as first round picks. And like I said, if you have the cap space to give Madubuike a deal worth $90-100 million over the next 4 years, then that means that you probably aren't expected to be, in the back end of that first round the next 2 years, which means that you could be giving up, a top 10 pick, top 20 pick, top 25 pick. And that is really, really, really tough capital to part with, as we saw with the Lamar Jackson situation. I'm sure there was a lot of trepidation from front offices, from ownership, about giving up these, valuable draft picks along with the 200 or 300 million dollars perhaps guaranteed that Lamar was requesting to get a deal done. So it's very rare that you see another team kind of intercede in these cases and say, we're going to get in business with this guy who already has the non-exclusive franchise tag designated on him, because it's just such an imposition, especially as you said, Paul, the logistics of having to figure out all the various moving parts of what happens if after this 5-day waiting period to figure out whether the Ravens or a team in the Ravens position could match this offer sheet, what happens to the rest of the guys that we needed for, to fill out this team. So it's a really, really tough situation. And I think that we'll probably see that reflected in just how few exclusive franchise tags and transition tags get offered this offseason.
Yeah, and in terms of how much Justin Madubuike could fetch from another team, either in terms of an offer sheet or in terms of just a free agency contract, if he were to hit free agency. I mean, you look at comparisons, Spotrac is projecting 4 years, 81 million. Javon Hargrave had 11 sacks in his final year with Philly. In 2022, he got 4 years, 84 million from San Francisco in free agency, but he was 4 years older than Justin Madubuike is at this point. Pro Football Focus's projection says Madubuike's contract could be worth $23 million annually for $92 million total. So teams would be already offering Justin Madubuike an absolute bag to sign with their team. And so if the Ravens place the non-exclusive franchise tag on Madubuike, then you're talking about not only a team having to pay $92 million for a defensive tackle, but also having to give up 2 first-round picks. And that is why that kind of tag would benefit the Ravens the most.
Yeah, and the way that I kind of found myself thinking about this and relating it to the real world is like, if you are a TV network or if you're a film studio and you have like a guy under your control, like under contract, you, when Modern Family had those like that crew of actors, they did, they knew that those guys were basically under contract for like 7 seasons essentially, and there was no way for those guys to get out, so they just pumped them for all they were worth, because even as those guys stars rose and rose until everyone on that show was just superstar famous, like ABC and the creators of Modern Family knew that there was an incentive to keep production going, because what's good for the goose is what's good for the gander, and the Ravens have the opportunity with Madubuike to not just keep him in house for at least another year, but also to potentially work out this long-term deal. You don't want to let him go this year and be rewarded with only, a third round compensatory pick. Obviously, the Ravens got Justin Madubuike with a third round pick, which is kind of funny in hindsight, but you want to do everything you can now that he's under your team control to maximize his value and to maximize your chances of keeping him long term. As you said with Lamar, the the benefit of that tag last year was that extended that negotiation window. And when you think about where the Ravens find themselves now, they're only here because they didn't think highly enough of Madubuike last year to give him a deal that would have completely ended negotiations and given both teams a win. You know, Obviously, Madubuike has told reporters that he bet on himself, and it's played out in a way that has been a positive for him and perhaps a negative for the Ravens long term in the negotiation with them. But I'm sure if they offered him a contract that was less than what he's projected to get right now by a couple $1 million a year less, we would probably be talking about how smart a business deal was for Eric DeCosta and the Ravens front office to get that deal done, because of just how expensive these interior game wrecking, game plan destroying defensive tackles are.
Yeah, and it's fascinating also because, you talk about players that bet on themselves and then they go into their contract year and they're extra motivated to produce incredible seasons. And that's exactly what happened with Justin Madubuike. Guys who are entering their contract years are under an extra incentive to perform well. And we saw it with a lot of the Ravens 1-year deal guys, Kyle Van Noy and Jadeveon Clowney racking up great stats as they're about to hit free agency. And it also stands in stark contrast to what happened with Lamar at the end of the 2022 season, because there might have been extra incentive because he had already produced such incredible highs. And because the quarterback position is so different from every other position, there was even less incentive for him to get back on the field from that injury, because
Right.
he was pretty much essentially guaranteed to, whether it was from the Ravens or somebody else, to secure the money. Whereas in Justin Madubuike's case, he had to go out and prove himself this year that he was going to be worth a massive contract. And good for him, because he absolutely did.
Yeah, I guess that is the counterfactual that we don't really we can't really say with any clarity how things would have played out. Like if the Ravens signed Madubuike to an $18 million a year deal last year, does he still come out and just be an all world type
Right.
guy in 2023? Is he a 7-sack guy? Is he an 8-sack guy? Does the deal that they make, you know, take them out of the running financially for a Kyle Van Noy or a Clowney in 2023? So, a lot of, you know,
Sliding
shifting
doors.
moments there, a lot of sliding doors moments there with how things could have played out. But still, the Ravens, because of their status as the team with control over Madubuike for at least a little while longer, until this window closes, they have that they can take the lead in this. That they just have to either designate him with a franchise tag or make him an offer he can't refuse before that franchise tag window closes, and just get this deal done for the next 3 or 4 years.
So what's your prediction? Is Eric DaCosta going to pull the trigger on this non-exclusive franchise tag like you think would make sense?
Yeah, I mean, he didn't talk much about the odds of doing so at that season-ending news conference. He lumped
Much?
in
He didn't
an
talk at
answer.
all about it. He
Well,
gave us no
he
clues
lumped in an
whatsoever.
I know. He lumped in an answer about the urgency of retaining Madubuike with an answer about how highly he thought of Patrick Queen as well, which I thought
Yeah.
was, the classy thing to do, even if it didn't give us a whole lot of good quotes to fill out our stories with. But I just think that of those two, for as good and important as Patrick Queen was to this team last year, there is an easier answer at that position because you already have
Yeah.
Roquan Smith and you have a promising second-year player in Trenton Simpson. Yes, there are promising players up front, but there's no one on that defensive line who you can say comfortably should be a Pro Bowler next year. And I think that's Justin Madubuike. And I think the cost, the opportunity cost of just waving him goodbye is far more substantial than what it would take to actually bring him back next year.
Plus the positional value. I mean, anybody on the defensive line, especially somebody with pass rush juice, a defensive tackle who can get to the quarterback, is just so much more valuable than a linebacker, especially when that linebacker is standing next to one of the best linebackers and highest paid linebackers in the sport. So, it defensively, that's why, those Justin Madubuike, Patrick Queen, both coming off phenomenal years. But if both were to hit free agency, it's pretty clear that Justin Madubuike would get more money in free agency than Patrick Queen. I have the same thing. I think the Ravens, if I were to offer my prediction to as of today, I would think that they are going to place that non-exclusive franchise tag on Justin Madubuike. And that doesn't mean that they won't be able to sign him to a long-term extension at some point before he, signs this franchise tag. But I do think Eric DaCosta is going to try to take essentially as much time as possible to get a deal done. And at the same time, it's worth the price of, if you can't get a contract extension done with him, it is worth the however much money, $19-20 million. And, the stability of just waiting to see if you can get a deal done with him and have him play on that tag for an extra year.
Yeah, and I think assuming they put the tag on him, if we get to late April and the draft is, kicking off and the Ravens, and they have been linked to a couple interior pass rushers, Byron Murphy out of Texas, Jerzon Newton out of Illinois, both the kind of athletic, disruptive, interior pass rush guys who you would expect to be day one picks. If the Ravens take one of those guys, that would be probably a pretty clear sign that they are frustrated with the Madubuike negotiations and not planning on bringing him back. Because if you are throwing another, premium pass rusher, another premium defensive lineman into that group, just like with linebacker, I think there's only room for so many people at that end. And the best way you know, to help yourself after losing a guy like Madubuike is to draft another really, really good or really, really promising interior pass rusher. And, there's going to be a lot of guys, I think, in play for the Ravens at that number 30 spot. But if it is an interior rusher, I think the writing would probably be on the wall as for how the Ravens feel about their chances of extending Madubuike.
Similar to how the writing may have been on the wall when they drafted Trenton Simpson with the 3rd-round pick, and Derek DeCosta got
Exactly.
all the questions about whether he was a potential Patrick Queen replacement, and he said all the right things in terms of we don't draft for positional need, we draft best player available. He was the best player available, but we all know that positional value and positional needs come into play, and now the Ravens are nicely set up so that if and when Patrick Queen leaves in free agency, they have somebody that they feel pretty good about, at least in house, to be able to replace him. All right. Well, we will have complete coverage on the BaltimoreBanner.com. Jonas and Gianna Hahn and Kyle Goon are all writing great stuff throughout this offseason as we get closer to free agency and the draft. We should pump a good review here on the Banner Ravens podcast that we got. Quote, a great Ravens pod leads this review. As an out-of-state Ravens fan, I am always looking forward to Ravens news. This pod has insiders and doesn't require an hour more to listen. Great addition to my feed. Thanks, fellas, says Middle River Terp. Thank you for the review. And if you do write us a good review, we will read it out on the podcast. Thanks to everybody for tuning in. Please like, rate, review, subscribe, all that good stuff. Follow Jonas on Twitter at Jonas_Shaffer. I am at Paul Mancano. We've also got some Orioles spring training coverage as well. So you can tune in for that if you're an O's fan as well. Thanks so much for tuning in. For Jonas Shaffer, I'm Paul Mancano, and we'll catch you next time.